The last passenger. I was exhausted, but I needed to make one more run before calling it a night. The city was quieter now, the streets slick from a heavy rain that had let up just a few minutes ago. I always hated this hour, that moment when the night falls too deep, and everything seems to fade into shadows. The streetlights gave the puddles a dull, ghostly gleam, but even their light couldn't pierce the heavy, damp air. The hum of the engine was the only sound. Nothing but the rhythm of my wheels on the wet road. I was nearly done, but the night had one last trick up its sleeve. A figure appeared out of nowhere, standing on the curb, drenched but unmoving, a silhouette carved out by the dim streetlight behind him. I didn't see him until I was almost past, and I had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting him. I cursed under my breath, flicking on the hazard lights, and rolled down the window. He didn't speak a word, just opened the back door and slid in, wet shoes leaving damp prints on the seat as he settled in, and I felt the car shift under his weight. The smell of rain and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron, followed him in. I didn't ask where he was going, he just looked at me, nodded once, and pointed down the street. I could barely make out his features in the rearview mirror. His face was drawn, pale, and his eyes had this emptiness to them. Like he was here, but not really here. I don't know why I kept driving. Maybe it was because he didn't seem threatening, just another soul lost in the night. Or maybe it was because I had to finish this shift. But I found myself obeying the silent direction he gave me, turning the wheel where his finger had pointed. The rain had started again, more of a drizzle now, but the night air felt heavier as the fog rolled in. The roads were quieter than usual, almost like the city was holding its breath, waiting. I glanced back at him once, catching the faintest movement in the corner of my eye, his hands resting still in his lap, but his shoulders, hunched, tense, like he was trying to keep something inside. His lips parted slightly, but not a word escaped. It was unnerving, and I didn't want to look again, but I couldn't stop myself. The street I was driving down was unfamiliar, barely any lights, no cars, just endless rows of darkened buildings. A chill crept up my spine, but I pushed it down. It was just a street. A dead end maybe, but nothing to worry about. Where exactly are we going? I finally asked, my voice louder than I intended. Nothing. No response. I tried again, a bit firmer, but my voice trailed off as I realized something. It wasn't just the silence that was odd, it was the fact that I was talking to a ghost. There was no one in the back seat anymore. Not in the way I thought. There was a void where his presence should have been, like he was there, but also not. The car seemed to slow on its own, like the engine was fighting me, reluctant to go further down this road. The buildings loomed now, oppressive, their shadows stretching across the pavement like long, dark arms. I should have stopped. I should have turned around. But something kept me moving. I was almost at the end of the street when I noticed the seat. The seat where the passenger should have been, where the weight should have left an imprint. It was dry. Completely dry, as though no one had been sitting there at all. And yet I had felt him, his presence. The car had shifted under his weight. I reached to touch the seat, a strange, cold emptiness filling the air as I did. Then I heard it. The faintest sound, like something dragging across the road. My gaze shot to the rearview mirror. There was nothing but my own reflection, but for a second, I could have sworn I saw something else. Something behind me, something waiting. I didn't dare to look again, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had to turn back. I had to get out of there. I slammed the car into reverse, but just as quickly, the engine sputtered. The car jerked, and the headlights flickered out. Total darkness. My breath caught in my throat. Then, from somewhere behind me, came a voice. Soft, distant, like it was carried by the wind. Go home. But the voice didn't sound human. It wasn't him, and it wasn't anyone else. It was the city itself speaking to me, telling me to turn around, to leave this place before it consumed me. And that's when I saw it. The door. The passenger door. It was wide open, the light from the street lamp barely catching the edge of it, and I knew with a sick certainty that whatever had been in that seat was no longer there. But where had it gone? I turned the wheel, the car shaking as it came back to life. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't care where the road took me now. I was done. I just wanted to get out of there. But the streets, the rain, and the city, they felt different now. And when I finally looked in the rearview mirror again, there was nothing behind me but the endless, dark road stretching on. No headlights. No signs. Just the sound of the engine and the eerie silence. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. The city was different now. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the strange emptiness creeping into the streets, the odd stillness hanging in the air like the city itself had forgotten how to breathe. But it wasn't just that. It was the way the lights flickered as I drove, the hum of my engine filling the silence with a strange, uncomfortable pulse. The rain had stopped, but the dampness in the air clung to my skin, heavy like a warning. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The longer I drove, the more the unease crept under my skin, settling deep in my bones. My thoughts kept returning to that moment, the moment I had seen the passenger disappear. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, that I had imagined it, that it was just a trick of the mind. But something about it, something about the way the seat had stayed dry, kept gnawing at me. The whole thing felt wrong. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, it was past 3 in the morning now. There was no one on the road, just endless stretches of empty pavement and the dim glow of streetlights that seemed to shimmer in the rain-slicked streets. Then, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A figure. It was a shadow at first, just a fleeting image, standing at the edge of the street, barely visible. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be him again? I pressed on the brake, slowing down as I approached, but there was no sign of him now. Just the shadow, hanging in the corner of my vision like an echo of something I didn't understand. I stopped, turning the wheel to bring the car to the side of the road, my breath caught in my throat. What the hell was going on? I told myself to keep going. That whatever it was, whoever it was, didn't matter. But my foot wouldn't lift off the brake. My hands were clammy on the wheel. I stared at the shadow in the mirror, watching as it melted away into the darkness like it was never there. My pulse raced. I was losing my mind. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had just had too much coffee earlier. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I checked the rearview mirror again, my breath shallow. The shadow was gone, but I didn't feel any better. If anything, I felt worse, like something was waiting for me in the silence, just out of sight. I had driven this route hundreds of times, but tonight, the streets felt foreign, unwelcoming. The houses, the empty lots, all of it felt like I was trespassing on something I had no right to be near. And then I saw it again. A flicker in the reflection. I wasn't imagining it this time. The rearview mirror wasn't just reflecting the darkness, it was reflecting something else. A shape. A figure. It was him. The passenger. He wasn't sitting in the back seat anymore, but I could see him in the glass, standing behind the car, barely visible in the reflection. His features were blurred, a smear of shadows against the streetlights. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, trying to outrun the terror creeping into my spine. But the car was moving slowly, too slowly. The road stretched on, endless, like it was mocking me. I looked at the mirror again. He was still there, standing just outside the glow of the headlights, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on me with that same haunting emptiness. I could feel it now, the weight of his gaze pressing down on me like I was being suffocated by the air itself. I knew I couldn't outrun him. I didn't even want to try. Something told me I wasn't meant to. The engine sputtered again, and I could feel the car shudder beneath me. It was like the night itself was holding me in place, trapping me on this road, forcing me to face whatever this thing was. My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of here. I turned the wheel hard, trying to find any exit, any way off this cursed path. But there was nothing, just miles of empty streets stretching out in front of me, closing in. The lights flickered again, and the air felt colder. It was like I was driving through a tunnel that didn't lead anywhere. And then, suddenly, I was back at the same intersection. I hadn't made a single turn. I hadn't passed any new landmarks. It was the same place. The same dark street. I glanced around frantically, looking for any sign of change, but everything was just as it had been before. My heartbeat quickened, and the car's engine died once again. Silence. I could hear the rain starting to fall again, light at first, then heavier, as if the world had decided it was time to drown me in its noise. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. This time, I didn't see him. I didn't see anything at all. The seat was empty. But I felt him. I felt his presence right there beside me, in the car, in the space between the seat and the steering wheel. I could almost hear his breath, steady and cold. The same metallic smell lingered in the air. It wasn't just his absence that was disturbing, it was the fact that he had never truly left. The door to the car creaked open on its own. And I heard it. The voice. Get out. It wasn't his voice this time. It was a low, guttural growl, like something from deep within the earth itself, clawing its way up through the pavement. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just jumped out of the car and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't even care where I was running to. But as I ran, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone. I ran, but I didn't know where to. My feet pounded against the pavement, the rain soaking me to the bone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind was a blur, just the pounding of my heart and the sound of my footsteps, echoing like they were chasing me, like something was chasing me. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. Something told me if I did, I wouldn't just see the car anymore. I'd see him. The voice. Get out. It had been a whisper before, an order from somewhere far darker than I wanted to believe. But now, it felt louder, like it was buried under my skin, crawling its way into my thoughts. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, twisting tighter and tighter, pulling me back toward that cursed street, to that moment when I first saw him. I didn't know how long I'd been running. Time seemed to stretch and distort around me. The city that had once been so familiar, now felt alien. I couldn't hear the sounds of traffic anymore, couldn't hear the bustle of late-night life. The rain had softened, but everything felt suffocatingly quiet. Like I was the only one left in the world. And then, I reached a dead end. A street corner I'd never seen before. A wall of brick and shadow that had appeared out of nowhere. I turned, looking around frantically, trying to figure out which direction I should go. My mind was racing, my eyes wild with fear, but the street was empty. The road I had been running down had ended in nothingness. I was trapped. I stumbled back a few steps, trying to get a sense of my surroundings. The streetlights ahead flickered, casting their broken light over the wet ground. But there was nothing there, nothing except the cold, empty silence. I had to go back. A part of me, the terrified part, screamed at me to keep running, to find an escape, but I knew there was nowhere left to go. The road had already closed itself off. I had come full circle, trapped in the same nightmare. My breath caught in my throat as I turned back to the corner I'd come from. The car was there. Not parked at the curb, not abandoned. No, it was still there, standing in the middle of the road as if it had been waiting for me to return. The headlights blinked on in the distance, then flickered off, then blinked on again, almost like a signal, like it was calling me. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The very air felt heavier. It wasn't just the rain or the cold, it was something worse. Something that made my skin crawl. I had no choice but to go toward it. My legs moved on their own, like they knew something I didn't. My mind screamed to stop, to turn around, but I couldn't. It was too late now. I reached the car. The door was open, just like before. I stepped closer, each footfall louder than the last, my hand hovering in the air like I was about to touch something I shouldn't. The faint glow of the streetlight illuminated the car's interior, the empty seat staring at me like it was daring me to sit. I couldn't breathe. I stepped inside. The leather seat was cold under me, almost uncomfortably so. And yet, it felt familiar. A low growl rumbled through the air, deeper this time, as if it was rising from the car itself. It was a sound that made my blood freeze. I didn't look around, didn't dare. I kept my gaze forward, my hands gripping the wheel, my body tense with dread. And then I saw it, in the rearview mirror. A figure. It wasn't just a shadow this time. It wasn't something my mind had conjured. It was him. The passenger. He was sitting right behind me, his eyes wide open, black holes where his pupils should have been, staring right into my soul. I could feel his gaze, like it was sinking into my skin, piercing through me. His presence was suffocating, heavy, like the air had turned to lead. The voice came again. This time, it wasn't just a command. It was a promise. You will stay with me now. My heart raced. My hands trembled, but I couldn't move. It was like the car had locked me in place, trapping me in this moment of pure terror. I couldn't scream. I couldn't run. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do except sit there and feel the coldness of his stare, the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke. The street outside seemed to stretch on, but it was different now. The lights were dimmer, the shadows longer, as if the world itself had folded in on itself, closing in around me. I was stuck in this limbo between the living and the dead, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't going anywhere. A shift in the air. And then it was gone. The passenger was gone. The car was empty. The rain had stopped. The streets were silent. I sat there, frozen, the engine still running, my fingers tight on the steering wheel, my chest tight with fear. The car was just a car again, the night was just the night. But something had changed. I looked out of the window, trying to make sense of it all, trying to breathe, trying to escape the suffocating feeling of the unknown that still clung to me like the dampness of the rain. And that's when I saw it, just a flicker in the rearview mirror. A single figure standing at the edge of the street. I turned to look. But there was nothing there. No one. Just the empty street. And I was alone again. But somehow, I wasn't.